everybody. I think that in most of cases, good afternoon, right? Most of you are from Europe, or more precisely from France. So here, I'm William Wang, Chinese name Hua Wang. I'm the professor from Emlyon Business School. And I'm also one of the steering committee members of Gerpisa. I participate the activities of Gerpisa since 1998. So sort of the one of the fidel, right, of this organization.
Very much.
And in terms of the this project, kind of the quick recall. My personally, I've wrote kind of over 10 papers about the Geely case. Some of them we worked together with Giovanni. And after years of working on that project, we earned the trust or more trust from Geely. So they opened the door for us, to organize the, lots of high-level interviews in China, in Gothenburg, with different peoples. So those are the backgrounds of this study. So for the future book publication, I will leave for Professor Zhang from the US to continue the talk. Wenxian, please. Yeah.
You want Giovanni speak next?
You can go on.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Good morning here from the US. My name is Wenxian Zhang. I'm a professor at Rollins College based in Winter Park, Florida. This Chinese automobile industry is really not my expertise. I really appreciate the invitation from William to join this research project. I did some studies on Chinese business in general and Chinese entrepreneurship. I recently published a 2-volume book on Huawei Goes Global last year. But I really enjoyed this research opportunity with William and Giovanni, and learned a great deal about Chinese automobile industry in general. The book is going to be published by World Scientific, that is based in Singapore. They are a big publisher in academic in Asia studies and of course the business. The tentative date of release is going to be around mid of 2021. So we are looking about maybe early July. Thank you.
Yeah, Giovanni, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy, me too, to be this again meeting with Gerpisa, even if online. I have been attending Gerpisa seminars and conferences a long time, so I've seen the evolution of this and the opening to new topics, new research fields. And so for me, Gerpisa has been a very, very important network to work with. This project on the case study of Geely was really an opportunity to come back on previous works and to try to deepen, to understand the strategies, to interpret in a wider way, thanks to the opening of information, thanks to two missions, one in China and one in Sweden, in Gothenburg. So it was for me really a pleasure to work with William and Wenxian. And I must say that originally our work timing was to work together during June, July, to have a very intensive work week. And because of the pandemic crisis, we were obliged to go on for a succession of long meetings exactly at this time to be able to work together on 3 continents. But it was challenging, but a very, very interesting experience, allowing me also to open a different interdisciplinary point of view, for example, on cross-cultural issues, how European and Chinese engineers who work together to a new technology project and so on. We could study that side also on the field. So thank you. We can go on for me.
Okay, good. Thank you for this introduction. We're still, I guess, waiting some other people to join us, but we can start the seminar now. So welcome to everybody to this Journée of Gerpisa, which is a little bit special because it would be in English, and there have been in the past other English spoken seminar, and there will be more in the future, because if there is possibly one small positive side to the COVID crisis, that we have learned to use these new technology tools that allow people like us in international network to meet more often through these digital technologies than we used to do before. And even if it has, of course, limitation, and we would have very much preferred to meet in person, that's provides some opportunities to meet more often. And so we will have more English spoken seminars of Gerpisa in the future coming, and I will talk a little bit about later at the end of our day. So today I'm very happy to welcome Hua WANG, Professor Zhang, and Giovanni Balcet, who are the three co-authors of a book that will be come out soon in 2021 on Geely. I've been honored to write the foreword of this book, so I've gone through the book in detail already, and I was very much impressed by this book. I knew about this book before, in the sense that I've been part of many discussion and presentations, since the parts that come together in this book have been presented during the previous years in the International Colloquium of Gerpisa, and they've really grown up into, I think, a very, very interesting book, because it's very rich, and you will see it really looks at Geely from different angles, but it's not really only about Geely. I think it's really a book about the Chinese automotive industry from a very regional angle, because we are not looking at the big joint ventures that have attracted the focus of research in the first years, but rather at the private Chinese company, which has which can be considered really as an emergency country transnational enterprise, and that is a really interesting object in itself that goes beyond the automotive sector. So we see more and more transnational company emerging from developing countries, even if I think you cannot talk anymore about giving the terms developing country to China seems very strange, since it's probably the most advanced economy right now in the world. But anyway, so this is a very interesting case, and it provides many insights which I think are very useful for our debates. And I think that the book was written before the COVID crisis. So the COVID crisis is changing things a little bit in the sense that is accelerating, at least it seems the case for the time being, the electrification of the automotive industry, in particular in Europe, but also in China. And one could say that a company like Geely can have a competitive advantage if this is the case, and that can be discussed. And also the automotive market are slowing down everywhere in the world, but has recovered much faster in China, and that also can be a source of competitive advantage for Chinese-based companies. So I think that another point that could be interesting to analyze is just to put the book in the light of what is happening with the COVID crisis, even if the book was not written at the time, and of course it cannot really integrate these very new developments since it's going to be published this year. But I think that could be a focus that perhaps some questions will be asked later on. So I will not speak any longer. So I propose to, I don't know how you have organized. So each of you can share the screen if you have PowerPoint.
So I have to say next page then, right?
Yes, that's what you'll have to do. But I will do that.
So the presentation will be shared by three of us. We are going to elaborate 9 points. The first is to give an overall picture of the automobile industry. The second one is talking about the rise of Geely. Then we will focus on the entrepreneurship of Li Shufu, as he is really the kind of the soul of that company. Then we will expound to the it's a globalization strategy of Geely with a focus on the Volvo case. In terms of the research and the development part, new product development part, we are going to talk about CVT K. Then we shift towards the global expansion with more acquisitions or outward foreign direct investment, and also discuss the business model innovation in terms of mobility solutions. In the end, we will conclude and open the floor for the discussion. Yes, next page. So to give you a general idea of how this book is organized, the text is a little bit small. So this book is divided by 4 parts. So the first part is a macro situation about the, a very quick introduction about China automobile industry. Then the rise of Geely, a panoramic view. Then the second part is talking about Geely's globalization with a focus on Volvo case. Then the third part is the expansion, as we mentioned, that you see that goes beyond of the case of the Volvo. There's some more acquisitions that we are going to also share with you. And the last part is a kind of a strategy upgrading and moving towards the future shape of the automobile industry in terms of how we try to understand the platform strategy of Geely, its culture and the brand development, and its mobility solutions as a kind of a business model, transformation. Okay, so next page, we are going to, I'm going to give you a very quick view, historical evolution about the automobile industry in China. So for those who are not getting used to know about, the history. So we briefly divide the industry history into 4 parts. The first part was identified as a kind of infant industry. The origin of the technology came from Soviet Union, and then the technology for producing the truck was shared, and as a kind of the technology spill over to some other manufacturing plants, several one all over the China, and then it entered to a period of the Cold War that China was facing. So in the remote and the mountainous areas, China built several factories. So that was the brief period between 50s and the 70s and the 90s. Then the 1979 marked the beginning of opening up of the China economic reform. And in the early stage, in the mid-1980s, we saw the introduction of the first joint venture by Volkswagen, then followed by the other players like General Motors and the Japanese. And as you know, that almost all the car makers, global car makers, as of today, are presented in China. So during this period, the technology transfer via the introduction of the international joint venture is the key to understand the growth of Chinese automobile industry. So it's not only driven by OEMs, it is also driven by the progressive introduction of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers as well. The third period marked by 2001, the reason is about the accession of the World Trade Organization of China. Before, during, and after that turning point of 2001, there were lots of discussions about impact, whatever, in positive way or negative way, about this significant step of opening up, right? A significant change of institutions and the international rules of the games. And as you can see that since 2009, China became the biggest country to produce the automobiles in terms of the volume and keep the leadership to today. And now you can also see a variety of forms of the partnership, state-owned enterprises, private firms like Geely, and then international joint ventures with the giants of SOE, state-owned enterprises. Starting from the last several years, China has formulated its manufacturing 2025 as a kind of industrial upgrading. Concretely in the field of the automobile industries, there was a clear strategy of upgrading towards smart cars driven by electric vehicles. And recently it was also the introduction of hydrogen cars as a kind of new energy vehicles. So China has demonstrated its ambition to take the leadership in this field. And at the micro level, Western companies are also using China as a kind of laboratory to experiment the new technology, especially in the smart electric vehicles. Yes, next page, please. So very quickly, this table is trying to share with you to say that composed by still over 100 car makers today, the automobile industry and the market is still highly fragmented. So we have not yet seen a clear sign in terms of the consolidation, despite that this was already a kind of the wish of the government since late 1990s. So this is the current situation of China market. So you can see that the top 20 car makers represent 76% of the market share, and still there is a long tail afterwards. In terms of the country of origin, Chinese brands represent 35% of the market share, European car makers 26%, Japanese 22%, American 10%, Korean 4%. So that is a kind of a country of origin or regional players analysis. Yes, next page, please. In terms of the industrial clusters, here is an illustration of a map of China. You can see that in the northern part, there is main composition is about Volkswagen, Toyota, Mazda, BMW. And then in Beijing, you have Hyundai, Daimler, Chrysler, and which now Geely is becoming the main, one of the big shareholder of Daimler. And then in the middle part, in Wuhan, you have Nissan. There's a Nissan, Kia, PSA, Honda, Renault in collaboration with Dongfeng Motors. In the coastal area, in the middle part, in Shanghai and its surroundings, Zhejiang, Jiangsu province, there are the presence of General Motors, Volkswagen, Iveco, Land Rover, Volkswagen again. And in the western part, Ford, Suzuki, Mazda, PSA are all created joint ventures with Chang'an, the Chinese car makers. And then in the southern part, with Guangzhou Automotive Corporation, The joint venture was organized with Honda, Fiat, Toyota, Fiat, Mitsubishi, etc. Right, and the BYD also had a joint venture with Daimler. So this is a kind of updated industrial clusters that we can share. I think that I will leave the floor to Wenxian to discuss about the rise of the Geely. Wenxian, please. Next page. Yeah.
Thank you. So Geely was founded back in 1986 as a private enterprise. It got into a motorcycle business in 1994 for low-cost production. So it's a Jiaji motorcycle sell as less than half of Japanese motorcycle. So it's a great business, export to more than 20 countries around the globe. But Li Shufu is very ambitious. He won't get into car business. But automobile industry is really tightly controlled by bureaucracy. So he could not get a permission, the state permit. So he get around, he found a partnership with it's a prison factory in very remote Sichuan province, Zhejiang. They have the permit to build minivans. So they form a joint venture. It's called Geely Boeing Auto, because at that time he was reading the book about American plane maker. He was really inspired, so he called his company Geely Boeing. So that's really a fascinating story, because not only he was sued by Boeing for copyright infringement, also Ford and GM all scratched their head and wonder what's going on. What is the American car maker, American plane makers try to do in China? So anyway, he get around. Finally, he got his permit after China admitting to WTO in 2001. So he began car manufacturing. He started basically reverse engineering. He bought a Mercedes and also a Chinese luxury vehicle called Red Flag. He asked his engineer to take part and try to develop the technology. That's how he started. But then back by 2007, Geely realized it cannot compete on the low cost production forever. So it began its strategic transformation. And then it's after Geely's acquisition of Volvo in 2010, it really began to take off. Since 2012, Geely had been ranked among Fortune 500 companies. I think the last ranking we have, I think back 2012, 2019, it was ranked 220. Next. So this is a 10 years sales volume that since China became the largest auto market in the world. So we track its total sales volumes. You can see it reached the peak in 2018. That is about 1.5 million. If you factor in all the Geely holding group, it's about 2.15 million. And then, of course, 2019 is impacted by the global recession is reduced to 1.36 million. So we are eagerly waiting to see last year's figure to see how that's going to be impacted by the global pandemic. Another interesting fact from this data is you can see the export of volume is very insignificant. It's not much impact on its production. So basically, China is still a dominant market for Geely. Next. And this is operating data for the last 10 years. So it's a revenue increase over the last 10 years, 692%. And its profit is 626%. It's quite impressive for a private enterprise in China. Next. And there's a global footprint of Geely. So Europe is more of a Volvo operation, but it's very interesting. It has many vehicles all over China. As William mentioned, some of those really doesn't make much of economic sense in the remote area like Guiyang, Zhangjiakou, and Daqing. The primary reason is really more political because he needs a local government to back the finance. So the regional government provide financial support, and he built the factory there. That's how it works. But fortunately, China is a huge country that can accommodate all those factories. But still, based on our calculation, it is underutilized. It's definitely our capacity issue. Next. And this is the corporate organization of Geely Holding Group, which is pretty complicated. The first group is Auto Group. That makes total sense. Then it's Volvo, and then it's a technology group and the commercial operation group, which seem to be reasonable to us. But then this is new addition that we try to figure out what is that about. The first one under the Geely technology group called B-Sky is a mining group. It was added last year. Really doesn't fit in its business at all. So we try to figure out how that's going to play it out. Then it had a business in tourism, in sports, and also they just split out its educational operation into a new group called Geelys Talent Management Group. They have its own university, its own training schools, and apparently its education is a pretty high profit business. Geely definitely played a role in that. Next. And Geely, its mission and vision is to bring Geely to the world and let the world fill with happiness and prosperity. So their slogan, Happy Life, Geely Drive. It made great emphasis on technology value, on its impact, its contributions to the society and to the environment. So that's their core value of Triangle. Next. So Geely, when it first started, its original mission is making affordable car for ordinary people. So emphasize low cost production for everybody in China. Then after its strategic transformation to move up the value chain, it's changed to make it refined car for everyone. So basically emphasize on refined cars. It's no longer low cost production, but with value added to it. The current the brand strategy and the mission statement really is making the safest and most environmentally friendly and most energy efficient vehicles. So the first Geely logo, Geely in Chinese, you know, it means lucky, auspicious. So the first logo, the one in the middle, look like a mountain, is to symbolize to conquering challenge, aspiration for success, but it also it's a number 6 grouped together because there's old Chinese saying, 六六大顺 means when you launch a new adventure, 6 means a great lucky number. So that was used for a few years until Geely have a national competition for his logo design. So the second one was used, this top winner, but it was discontinued shortly after because people accused it's very similar to Toyota. So they abandoned that logo and they adopt its Emlyon, that is for its upper end vehicle that converted into the current Geely logo, which you see the two colors, the blue and the black means sky and earth in harmony. The six-pack implied muscle and power, and also the shape of the shield indicates safety. So that's their design, which I think is pretty good. But still, people accuse, at least for the Emlyon, have some similarity to Cadillac logo. Next. Unlike German automakers who have a family brand strategy, Geely had individual brands. They had multiple brands. So actually, when we try to come out with a book for a cover, we want to put a Geely Auto logo on the cover. Geely folks say, no, we should take it down. They don't want to diminish other important logos in its family. So there's no logo on the book cover. So under Volvo, there's a Volvo and Polestar. That's their high-end electronic vehicles. Of course, it has a partnership with the German maker. It's a smart vehicle. Proton is Geely's effort try to get into Southeast market, based in Malaysia. And that deal in 2017, Geely also acquired a British luxury sports car maker, Lotus, to try to get into that sector. Geometry is the new brand that Geely produced for its high-end electronic vehicles. And it's supposed to compete with Tesla. Linko is a current new brand. It's partnership built by Volvo and with Geely. LEVC is converted from a London taxi company. Verizon is the commercial division, electronic commercial buses, that sort of thing. So it's a very complex brand strategy as far as we can tell. And we actually make recommendations that Geely should consider to consolidate and focus on the key brands that William probably going to cover in his conclusion part. Next. Geely's success really largely due to entrepreneurship of Li Shufu. He is really a grassroots entrepreneur. And it's quite an amazing life story. He, unlike other people who have connections and well-to-do families, he grew up in a poor farmer's family in Southeast China, Zhejiang province. He wanted to get into business from very early on. His first business actually is when he was a high school student. He peddled people around town using his bicycle and ferry for 50 cents a ride, that sort of thing. And then when he's waiting in line for get his high school photo taken, he got into the idea to open a photo store. So he backed a local photo shop owner. He offered to be his student without pay to do all the cleaning, all the support work, so he can learn the technology. So he worked there, sleep there for 3 months, learn how to use a camera. His father lent him 120 RMB. So he pedaled bicycle around town taking photos. So he get 1,000 RMB back. So it's more. It's about 10 times within a year. From there, he opened a photo store, and then he realized he can make more money, recycle the precious metals from chemical liquid using to process photos. And from there, he opened an appliance store because appliance recycle store because there's more metal to be recycled. So he started with a township enterprise to build making refrigerator. Was very successful, but was eventually shut down because he did not have a license. So then he got into a motorcycle that I mentioned earlier. he had this nickname, madman of Chinese auto industry. When he first attached people in Shanghai asking for technology support, and they looked down at him. He was so upset. He said, he famously claimed, what is so complicated? The car is just basically two sofas on four wheels. So he actually claimed that even in the early 2000s, that GM and Ford are going to get in auto business, and he's going to acquire a Volvo. And nobody believed him. So he got that nickname. So he's really a bold thinker and dreamer with far-sighted vision. But also he was also a doer. He trusts his people. He gives them the support, and he takes a risk. So I think the last bullet point is also very important. He was very media savvy, so he never get himself into political trouble. He is a representative in the People's Congress. That's him in Tiananmen Square with Volvo in the background. His Geely car actually being used as for the official Chinese events like People's Congress, like receiving foreign dignitaries. So he really knows how to navigate in Chinese political waters, which is definitely to his credit for Geely's success. Thank you. I'll turn to Giovanni next.
Thank you. So we have seen up to now that Geely is a private company which did not follow the dominant pattern of Chinese car makers, i.e. state-owned enterprises and joint ventures with multinational actors. And some of the previous slides also provide an idea of the geographical spread of Geely as a transnational corporation. Now let's focus on this aspect, the multinational, transnational dimension, and this, the pattern and the path of this expansion. Geely decided quite early to go global because of two different drivers. First of all, access to new markets, and that was the case of developing countries, former Soviet Union countries, African countries, Asian countries. So access to new markets and evolution of previous export strategies, even if the share of export on total production has never been so significant. But also, and that's much more interesting, access to foreign technologies, to foreign brands in developed economies, and we'll focus on that. And second, also the idea to repatriate, to bring back to China product and technology, and access new product segments at the higher end, growing up from the initially very, very low level, where profit margins and growth opportunities are or were more interesting. Next, please. So we can interpret this trajectory focusing on two twin trajectories going on in parallel and then joining in the same strategy. On one hand, the technological catching up very fast, that moved via reverse engineering, product architecture innovation, and finally asset seeking foreign acquisition. On the other hand, the international and multinational growth that also evolved from export to foreign assembly plants and to more integrated foreign production. Next. Okay, we can see the first part of this evolution, the twin trajectories in the upper part of the graph, technology imitation, reverse engineering, the ability to copy foreign products, a body from one car maker, an engine from another one, finally evolving into a capability to build up an original product architecture and integrating the knowledge and the skills. At the same time, there was an international growth trajectory starting from a simple exportation to developing countries to assembly plants abroad. That is quite usual, of course, in this industry. And the point where the two strategies were joining in the years between 2002, 3, 5, and especially 2008 with the great financial economic crisis was what is defined in economic and international business literature as asset-seeking strategies, asset-seeking acquisitions abroad. That means investment in order to access what is lacking in the home country and what is available in the host countries. First of all, technology, but also brands, skills, organizational and managerial capabilities. So this is a theoretical category we used in this book, and that's referred to authors such as John Cantwell, Matthews, Rajneesh Narula, that further developed this concept. Next steps was a tentative of global asset integrations and expanding overseas market share. Next, please. Okay, so if you want to refer to the main step of this multinational international growth, so till 2002 we had exports, even if the volume of exports have never been so important, to a variety of developing or intermediate income countries, ranging from Africa to Asian and former Soviet Union. A step two, very important new change in a strategic change, took place in 2006 with the first minority participation, very clearly asset-seeking oriented in a foreign company. That was the case of London Taxi. It was a minority participation that evolved over time to become a full ownership. After the crisis, especially since 2009, on one hand, we had new transplants, new local assembly, again in transition or developing countries, but also new acquisition of foreign company in more developed countries, DSI in Australia, we'll come to that, and of course the case of Volvo and Emlyon. Next. Next slide, please. Skip to the next. Okay. I don't know, is Tommaso, can you go to the next slide, please? Well, I can continue anyway.
I'm moving. What is the title? Perhaps there is some delay in my sharing of...
Okay, no, go back now.
Okay.
Go back again, sorry. Okay, that's good. So some more detail on London Taxi. As I told before, the first participation was taken in 2006 from the British holding, and it was a minority share, about 20%. And London Taxi and Geely established together a joint venture in Shanghai to expand on the Chinese market and building up a factory there. In 2013, Geely took the full ownership of London Taxi. It was a very important move, and followed by a very important technology shift towards electric vehicle. So the British facility moved to full electrification of the new products, also following the new regulations in cities such as London, of course. Well, the DSI, the story Australia, was really created by the impact of the crisis. It was an opportunity of investment in a very performing and high-tech company producing automatic transmission systems. And it was a case of full acquisition, absorption of foreign technology, and allowing Geely to catch up, not only to take the leadership in automatic transmission systems in China. Volvo, as you know, the acquisition was made in 2010. Another important operation was 2014, the acquisition of Emerald, British electric startup company. Next, please. Okay, let's focus on the story of Volvo. It was what's interesting to observe that it was a long-term view. So they tried to make a very important foreign acquisition in order to acquire not just market share, but the technology, knowledge, experience, and brand. So there was a long, active search for an asset-seeking acquisition. And after the new opportunities created by the crisis, finally, years after the search process started, they could focus on the negotiation with Ford, that was the owner of Volvo, and they wanted to sell out a huge operation involving 200 lawyers, consultants, banks, etc. It was closed in 2010. Go on. Next, please. Okay. We must say that on the financial side, a very interesting point is that part of the financial effort was made by 2 Chinese provinces and 1 municipality. We'll see in a map very soon that where was oriented the expansion and the production and the new activities of Volvo in China. What happened after the acquisition? There was a first stage with a very, very gradualist and attitude. At the group level, Li Shufu became president, but in the board of the 8 directors, 2 were from China and the other 6 from other countries. So the main philosophy, let's say, was to keep autonomy and independence of Volvo. So that was very, very important for the transitional years. And the slogan was Volvo is Volvo, Geely is Geely. However, first steps, first moves towards convergence, integration, synergies took place, as we'll see soon, since 2013, 3 years after the acquisition. What's really striking is that the post-acquisition period was a success story both for Geely and for Volvo, notwithstanding the initial enormous challenge of that kind of integration. Next, please. Performances. Volvo came back to profits in 2013 and increased the sales, reaching a historical high in 2015. And interesting to note, they came back with a revival of sales in the US, where they had been declining. So the effect on the ground was that in the historic factory close to Gothenburg, Torslanda, we visited last year, they introduced a third shift. So there was not a decrease, but there was an effect, positive effects on jobs in Gothenburg. And we see that's very important. Go next, please. Okay, here we have some figures. In the total sales reached this famous $500,000 2015 to increase till 2019, and that's due to more or less half a decline to 48% to Europe, the traditional main market, but with China increasing from 8% at the moment of acquisition till 22% last year, in 2019. And the US recovered a little bit, and the other areas. Next, please. The challenge on the ground of cross-cultural relations was really huge, because as we know, the business history is full of examples of post-acquisition, post-merger integration, poor performances or failures. We know the story of Daimler Chrysler and many other cases. So it was very surprising, very amazing, the fact that in this case, two so far so different cultures were able to integrate. So in the book, we try to have a look at this issue of cross-cultural dialogue, how they could build this synergy in a positive way. Cultural distance was striking, and in fact, initially there was a very negative reaction from trade unions, local media in Sweden, and also local policymakers, not so much national policymakers. A sort of factor LOF, liability of foreigners, specific to Chinese, to the fact that this company was Chinese. So there was a skepticism about will the Chinese close our factories and shift the production back to China, for example. So a lot of distrust initially. But the gradualist and pragmatic approach by Geely helped to evolve this situation. The great autonomy, Geely is Geely, Volvo is Volvo, helped to go through this transition, and especially the good results in terms of expansion in China, expansion on third market, with positive feedbacks in Sweden, especially in the Gothenburg region, with production, technology, job creation. All that helped to a rapidly changing attitudes after the transitional period. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to take part to a meeting in Brussels at the Trade Union Institute, ETUI, where there were many trade unionists from different companies with participation of Chinese FDI in Europe. And those from Sweden, in fact, had quite a positive attitude on that. Next, please. Okay, here we have the geography and of the new operation, new investment of Volvo after the acquisition. The most important are the new assembly plants in Chengdu, 2013, and Daqing in the north, 2004, and in Hebei province area, at university on the way. And where the new plants had been built, participated financing the takeover. It was a sort of a policy, regional development, industrial development policy for them. Next, please. Okay. On the side of innovation, R&D and product development, the first move immediately after the acquisition was modification, adaptation of the product for Chinese demand, for the specific patterns of demand in China that's quite different from the European one. Then the creation 1 year later of a Chinese R&D center in Jiading for the same target of adapting the product. And finally, the new really important step was the creation of a joint R&D center in Gothenburg called the CVT. So there was no, of course, real global engineering, but quite early moves towards platform sharing and I don't see the next slide. Okay, thank you. And this is the CVT, China Eurovehicle Technology, created in 2013 with and located in Gothenburg. Not close to the older factory, but in a new science and technology center in front of the downtown. That was the first overseas R&D center for Geely in history. And it represented really an evolution from the asset-seeking strategy to a new proactive asset creation and joint creation, technology convergence, and really deeper cooperation between Geely and Volvo. And it was there also that the cross-cultural cooperation was really working. Imagine the case of design, because there is engines, technology, transmission, but also car body design made in Gothenburg with mixed teams, Chinese, European, and really international people from more than 35 countries joining in this quite huge R&D center with hundreds of employees and contractors. And the output of this CVT is shared between the two brands and also another new brand that I refer soon. So it became very quickly the main channel for joint research and technology transfer, leading to this process of technology convergence. Especially powertrains for electric vehicles were one of the most important achievements. The major original achievement of CVT was a new platform called Compton Modular Architecture, CMA, that was the base for a new family of models. Next, please. Based on modularity and innovation. Compact modular architecture started with CVT in 2013, and it was really a turning point for Geely because was launched in 2017, initially very dependent on a twin Volvo platform, but developing more and more in autonomy in following year. And for building cars from this platform, there was a new greenfield plant in China that went into production the following year with a new brand called Lynk & Co. That was launched up to now in China, but is intended to be sold in a global market. And that's the direct result of this process of integration of this synergy between the Volvo technological excellence and tradition and Geely financial resources, attention to the cost side. So in the interviews we made in Sweden, there was really this relation between the tradition of Swedish and European engineers with their look for technology excellence and the more innovation-oriented and dynamic attitude of Chinese engineers and computer experts, software experts that more and more interactive. Okay, the next probably will be Hua William again. Okay, Hua William will conclude the presentation now.
Okay, I will try to make it short because it's already over 1 hour. Yes, Giovanni has discussed in details about the case of Geely Volvo. It's already a 10-year history and can be identified as kind of success, commercial success of outward foreign direct investment by emerging multinationals. On top of that, these slides show you several, at least 3 to 4 cases about the new new operations by Geely. One was the indirect acquisition of Daimler's stake via very complex financial operations. And the moment of the acquisition, Geely became de facto the biggest owner of Daimler. And right after, 2 joint ventures with Daimler was created. One was focusing on the premium ride-hailing business in China. And another one was the global, not only in China, but the global joint venture on the smart car. And also very interesting, you can find that there is a kind of the reverse technology transfer from Geely to Daimler. The objective is to create the electrified smart car based on the technology processed by Geely. Second big case is about also a long-term vision between 2006 and 2013 about the London taxi. That when you travel to London, you can see that London taxi. So it was also an illustration on the long-term vision of Geely, how to acquire the asset in a progressive manner, not a pure financial operation, but a kind of progressive asset acquisition in a pragmatic way. And I suppose that our friends in Paris, you can also find the similar shape of the cars under the brand name of CAO. Now it's running on the Metropolitan. The third one is the expansion to the Asian market with the acquisition, a strategic partnership with a Proton. It's a kind of after the failure, sort of the failure of the direct exportation via SKD, CKD operations. So they are acquiring the asset of Proton, and at the same time to acquire the asset of Lotus, because it was owned by the Malaysian group. Next page. Next, yes. Well, the innovation does not limit in the narrow sense of producing the cars or kind of already kind of the important innovation from traditional ICT cars towards electric cars. Geelys initiative has also taken in the mobility solution. So what they call it is the MaaS, right? Mobility as a service. In this field, there were also 4 categories of mobility service based on the nature of the products, low-speed electric vehicles, economic vehicles, mid-range cars, and the premium cars like Mercedes, Benz. Then there were also incremental innovations, goes beyond the car, but by connecting the high-speed train, the TGV, right, from the French term, and the ride-hailing business via the joint venture with the train company, high-speed train company in China. And also there was the launch of the low orbit satellite for the service or the future service of a high precision positioning. So a similar approach made by Elon Musk, on this initiative. And there were also several minor operations like the ultrasonic train, and 2 projects based on the flying cars. One was the acquisition of Terraforgia from the US, and another one is the co-participation of the stakes together with Daimler on the project of Volvo Copter in German. Okay, next page. So moving towards the conclusion part, in fact, this diagram has been illustrated, or the left part of the diagram has been illustrated during the presentation by Giovanni. And based on our observation, the new finding is the following. So in the early stage, Geely, as a kind of emerging multinational corporations, was mainly looking for the technology catching up via, for example, the asset seeking and asset acquisition from overseas market, and then try to integrate those assets. Well, the recent phenomenon, what we can find is a phenomenon based on the Durning's eclectic paradigm, the OLI paradigm. We can find out is there is also the interesting phenomenon that can be identified as the asset augmentation and the asset creation. For example, asset augmentation for Geely was the creation of a CVT R&D center. Asset augmentation for Volvo was the increasing investment by Geely on the manufacturing plants of Volvo plants in Sweden, and after that, the constant growth of the sales. And another significant investment is the SPA platform. In fact, it was invested by Geely by investing $11 billion to Volvo. What's more, there is also the phenomenon of asset creation. That means two parties try to create something new that does not exist. As Giovanni has mentioned, the creation of a new brand in between Geely cars and Volvo cars. That was the creation of Lincoln Co. You know, it's a very strong illustration about asset creation and asset augmentation. Looking forward in our conclusion part, we also made our reflections on the boundary of the firm. So Geely is not a simple car maker, it is a holding group. And on top of that, we are also questioning or investigating on the future efficiency improvement of the company, as well we identify that the percentage of Geely's cars are using new platforms like CMA, BMA, SEA, etc., only represent 20% of the total new car production. Instead, so it means that it's still in a transitional period. And also, in terms of the branding strategy, as illustrated by Wenxian, you can see that there is a kind of a multiple brands with some kind of the confusion from the consumer's point of view. So there is, according to our analysis, there is a need on the rationalization on the brand portfolio. So we would like to take this opportunity to call for our future study and the collaboration in terms of the research. Because in this book, in fact, if you move to the next page or the next one, yes, this is the book cover page. Well, if you take a look on the next page about the table of the content, the way of writing of this book is for each chapter, we start with a kind of the simple literature review, linking with one category of the theoretical background, like international business, FDI, cross-border M&A, asset seeking augmentation, entrepreneurship, corporate culture, brand management, organization dynamics, business model innovation, etc. So definitely, based on those rich first-hand, materials and the data, we can continue to dig deeper and to investigate, either only focusing on Geely or by a comparative approach between one to other companies or multiple case studies. I would like to stop here, and yeah, thank you for your listening. It's long, while it is. I hope that in the near future we can present officially this book. Thank you.
So what I propose to do is that we start the first round of questions. We collect some of them, and then we'll let the three speakers answer, and we keep going until we ask all the questions until our time is over. So who wants to start? I guess there might be, I've seen people asking already questions in the chat, but if you want to take the floor and ask your questions directly to these presenters, you can do that. I'm talking to Vittorio Valli that asked questions, if he wants to take the floor. There is Assis Sigfrido wants to ask a question, so I'm waiting for Vittorio to decide if he wants to ask it himself or just we read it through the chat. Sigfrido, please go ahead.
So thank you very much. Happy New Year to all of you. And particularly congratulations to William and Gianni and the co-authors who have done a great, really exciting monograph that we are all looking forward to read. Of course, as an historian, I'm particularly interested about what you're describing because it looks very similar to other cases of national champions, no, how been creating national champions, and this is one of these cases. And of course, as you know, I'm interested very much on the political and public policy side of the development of the automobile industry. And I'm sure you didn't touch much on this point, but maybe that's the opportunity in the questions to expand. What was particular on the relationship of Geely to the Chinese state? It was because you develop, of course, a story very much of entrepreneurship, but we know that in general, I mean, I would be surprising at least that in China, the state didn't give any attention, didn't pay much attention to a company which may also have some interest that you didn't mention, I ignore if it's the case, in technologies that can be used also for the army, no? For military, maybe technologies that could be used for vehicles for military use. Maybe there are other state-owned companies. I ignore everything about the Chinese automobile industry, but all the general question on the relationship with the public policies with the state, it's a general question that I would like to ask. Then a more precise question is that, as you know, now there is being just signed an agreement between the European Union and China, no, on trade and investments. And I would like to know if you have the opportunity to reflect on what is going to imply for Geely, such an agreement. I mean, in Europe, most of the debate now is put on the other side, on the European companies coming to China, not needing anymore to do joint ventures. But the other part, we are less told by, of course, by European authorities, because we need to there is still to be ratified this trade agreement, trade and investment agreement. So did you have time to have a look and to see what is going to be the potential impact for the strategy of Geely in connection with Volvo? So that's my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sigfrido. Are there any other questions for this first round?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Who can I?
Yes, go ahead, Lorenzo.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but I have several. So if it's too complicated to follow me, I can also write them down after. First of all, thank you very much for this very good presentation, super interesting case. I also congratulate you on getting this book out. I look forward to reading it in full. So my questions are, one is related to the growth and the expansion trend that you showed of the Chinese, of Geely. I think if you can, we can't go back to the slide, but I saw a constant growth up to 2018, and then there is a slight decline in between 2018 and 2019. If you could expand on what happened at that point for the company. I'm sorry if there's background noise. The other thing is the first part of the presentation mentioned that the expansion of the auto industry in China was not only led by OEMs, but was also driven by tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So what happened in terms of public policies? Were there any public policies addressed at suppliers development? How did China achieve this? I'm not an expert of China. I studied mostly India and Thailand in Asia. Another question is about the Geely mission of transitioning from affordable cars for ordinary people, what you mentioned, to refined cars. So an upgrading inside the company. What, in your view, allowed this exactly to upgrade in terms of models? Was in this case the shift towards electrification, or what exactly, or the acquisition through Volvo? So what was the threshold that allowed this upgrading in terms of models? Sorry, I have another refers to the sourcing strategies. If you could expand a bit on where, like in terms of component suppliers, what does Geely source locally? What does Geely source from abroad? And finally, could you tell us anything about labor relations within Geely? If you have any news, is there a trade union allowed in the plants? What are the working conditions? If there is a moment, any information to share regarding this company, since the whole case is very new and very recent. Sorry for too many questions, but if you want, I can write them later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lorenza. I'm just see that there is a question by Bruce who says he has very strong noise in his apartment, so he prefers to write it down. And it's a very precise question. It's about new Geely service of battery as service program that swaps out batteries for EV. They may also be following Neo's lead by separating the cost of the vehicle from the cost of the battery, where the consumer makes a separate rental program for the battery. So if you have anything about that, if you have knowledge of that, and if you have any comments on that. And that was a question about the employment in Sweden after the acquisition of Volvo, both for the factory and the R&D centers. I don't understand very well what this REAN means, but if you can develop a little bit about employment. And if I'm not wrong, I think that Martin Drzezinski and Julie Jurgens in their book about words of production in the automotive cars have also looked a little bit into Geely. I might be wrong. I don't know if I think that they were looking about other Chinese company than the joint ventures between Volkswagen and Toyota with the Chinese state-owned companies. And I'm pretty sure that they had a case study about Geely, but that's might need to be checked. So I think there are really enough questions for our speakers to answer. So I propose to let them answer, and then we will have at least a second or perhaps a third round of questions. So I don't know in which order you would like to answer, but please, perhaps I can start, and then Giovanni, and then, or up to you.
Okay, I try to pick some questions to make the answer. One question I would like to answer is about RCEP, the new agreement among Asian countries. So the general idea is to reduce the tax rate in about 10 years, to reduce to a zero base. So from right after the the announcement on the signature of RCEP, we can see that certain stocks of automobile companies, and I'm talking about the Chinese one, Chinese automobile companies and the components, their price went up, from a sense that it seems that there will be a good news for them in terms of regional integration. So this is one thing. And also to answer the question of Lorenzo, in terms of tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, in fact, yes, start from the early 1990s, just like any other developing countries, there was the policy in terms of local content, what we call the local content policies. So the objective, the very successful one, started with Volkswagen project in Shanghai. So at that time, the price of the car was extremely high, and the amount this price being sold, there was a certain percentage being collected and then re-injected for the localization of the content. And from that project, with the help of the government and with those type of local content policy, China started the technology spillover, first of all driven by foreign OEMs and their tier 1, tier 2 suppliers being invited to China to build an industrial cluster, right? In French is tissu industriel. For the battery question, it is true that now there are different initiatives to further innovate in the electric vehicle industry. One of the initiatives was the separation between the battery and the car. While this initiative was taken by several new new competitors or new rivals in the China market, like NIO. So they are offering this business model by separating the battery pack and the car. While this was not yet, this is not yet the approach proposed by Geely. It seems that neither it is the approach proposed by one of the global leading car players called Tesla, right? So that is the current situation. So in short, different EV car producers are taking different approaches. And it is true that if you dig even deeper, you can see that the emerging new car, in fact, it's really based on, if we say that it's a kind of co-creation, community-based co-creation, a business model innovation, right? It's not selling the car. It is also selling a lifestyle. It is also sometimes it's go beyond the Tesla model. So the relationship between fans or the car owners and the car brand is much strong, right? So we don't have the time to discuss that company, but it's an American listed company and also have a good performance in China. So I stop here and then leave the the resting part of the questions to Giovanni and Wenxian.
Thank you. Thank you so much for so many interesting questions. They are very, very stimulating for us. I try to answer to champion Sigfrido question. Well, I think the case of Geely is not the case of a typical national champion. Typical national champion could be SAIC, Shanghai automotive industry, that's local state-owned, clearly supported by the local state with important international joint venture. I think Geely is quite a different original trajectory of growth. What's clear to me, to us, is that there was a very special and deep and important relation with local governments, and at least 2 provinces and 1 huge municipality, the Shanghai one, which supported the expansion, supported from a financial point of view the acquisition of Volvo, and where there was investment after the acquisition. So what is I could see clearly is that relation with these important policymakers, important actors. About the impact of the new recent agreements with the EU, well, of course, the attention of everybody is focused on European investment in China and the fact of fading out the obligation for joint venture, etc. On the side of Geely, I think there were not restrictions in its operation, except the problems of the relation with the local media, local trade unions in the initial stages. What was defined as liability of foreigners of being Chinese in particular. About, well, the upgrading of the Geely models is a very important point, because initially in the domestic Chinese market, it was really the low-end, low-cost, low-quality products. And so it was fantastic upgrading. I think it came well before the electric vehicle. It went along with the acquisition of Volvo, of course, but even before with other foreign acquisitions, London Taxi, for example, and the SDI in Australia, etc. So there were that sort of twin trajectories, parallel trajectories of technological catching up and of international operation interacting each other. And we try to point out to you. About the labor relation, I leave to the Chinese colleagues to comment on the side of Geely in China. On the side of relation with European labor, well, it was quite wise, because before the acquisition of Volvo, a delegation of Swedish trade unionists was invited to Shanghai, and they were given some, there were some statement promising not to reduce the jobs in Europe and preserving the production. And so I think that's connecting also with the question by Vittorio Valli. Employment in Sweden didn't decrease because there was no shift of production. On the contrary, there was an increase of Volvo production abroad. With export of components for Europe, with a complex value chain, we should to study closer. And so the labor relations improved over time after initial skepticism, when Swedish side realized that there was no alternative, and in terms of jobs, of transfer of technology even, and financial support for new investment, there was also a positive impact. And finally, we had, beside this, in our work, we had, especially during the mission in Sweden, a very fruitful discussion with Swedish colleagues, the School of Geography based in Gothenburg, especially Alstan Kleis and Ramsin Jacob, that have been working a lot on this story of Volvo and on the local impact of Chinese investment there. I stop here. I leave Wenxian to.
Sure, thank you. I see quite a few questions. You guys have already a good coverage. I just want to add from my perspective. First, on the state relationship, Geely, as you know, is a private enterprise, and the Chinese industry is primarily dominated by a large state-owned enterprise and joint venture. So Geely is sort of an exception, stand out on its own. But I mentioned that Li Shufu, the entrepreneurship, he can play the government. He can receive the funding after initial struggles. Also, you have to bear in mind that the Chinese automobile market is not purely driven by the market. It's not in the Western sense of market economy, because state play a much more active role in control, in issuing license, and also provide the support. So quite a few of those factories, and also the Geely acquisition of Volvo, as Giovanni mentioned, local government play a large part. They provide the finance, and when Geely build the factories, mostly it's just a regional government. Even though the central government have a tight control, they want to reduce capacity, they want industry to consolidate. But regional government, they have their own interests. They want to provide incentive. They want to give the land. They want to give a tax break. So that's how the deal are made. That's why I mentioned some of those factories, the site, the operation doesn't make a lot of economic sense. But that's the reality on the ground. I think someone mentioned about sourcing. I think most of Geelys production sources come from local. I don't think there's a lot of from international supplies. Geelys transformation originally started purely as economical driven because it cannot compete on the low cost forever, because the industry is very technology intensive and investment intensive. So Geely had to transform itself. But after this acquisition of Volvo, it really inspired by Volvo's track records in safety and its impact on the environment. So Geely really make genuine efforts in that regard. So that's a wise mission statement changed over the years. We did not visit the factory in China when we did our research, but we rode the electronic vehicles. Very smooth, pleasant experience. The first time I rode in Geely vehicles, it's an enjoyable experience. So basically, Geely is riding the trends of the new technology, the battery operated, the EV, and of course, mobility, because that's the future of the industry, and they can receive the funding from the both central and local government. To the labor relations, Giovanni mentioned, when we conduct our research in Gothenburg, we interviewed the academics there, and the impression we get is originally there was quite suspicions. There's a high doubt about the future of Volvo because the company had a very negative experience when it's under Ford. But Geely was able to convince Volvo people when Li Shufu was there. He doesn't have a really English skill, but he pronounced 3 words: "I love you." Really touched the people there, and so the folks, Volvo people, they really think this is a good move after Geely's acquisition. But as to the future, nobody knows. Unions in China, Geely had a sort of labor union, but it's not in the Western sense. So I think people are pretty happy working in Geely because it's a fast-growing company. We visit the company headquarters, we see tons of young people have lunch, so it's quite impressive seeing. I think that the company has a bright future. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all these answers and also for all the questions. There are other questions that have come up in the chat, and I have some questions too, so I will try to combine both. My first question is about Ford, because Ford was the owner of Volvo, was also the owner of Jaguar Land Rover, if I'm not wrong. And I mean, Ford is a huge multinational company with a very historical experience in managing subsidiaries and R&D centers all around the world, and has failed completely to manage these 2 premium companies. I think they sold both companies at a lower value than they've bought it. So that's really highlight how much bad was the management of Ford, of these 2 companies. And both have been bought, but literally, I mean, they've been acquired by emerging multinational. Tata is a big conglomerate, but still in the car industry is a small player. I mean, at the time when I bought Jaguar Land Rover. and Geely is even a smaller player by global standards. And both have been extremely successful in a very short period of time, both in a difficult period after the crisis. Both Jaguar Land Rover and Volvo has revived and have been thriving, have been growing at an amazing pace. So that's a very interesting two stories. I remember when Luis Schweitzer came to the Gerpisa colloquium, and also met him before we were talking about Brexit, and Luis Schweitzer, the former CEO of Renault, told me, well, we need to know more about that. It's very surprising how Tata, we were talking about Jaguar Land Rover, Tata has managed to turn Jaguar Land Rover in a fast expanding business, very profitable. So that's very surprising. So what are your insights? Because these are very, very spectacular results. So I understood some of your analysis, which is that they lack the autonomy, but also I think there is a matter of investing massively in this company. So that's perhaps a big difference by comparison with the previous management. They really put a lot of money in both Jaguar Land Rover and Volvo. I introduced Jaguar Land Rover as well because I know that Giovanni is also an expert of Tata. So that's why I think that comparison is interesting. So that's my first question I mean, we have already talked about that, but how would you what are the main differences between the Ford management and the Geely management concerning Volvo? And do you have feedback about that? My second question is about what you've said also, that this asset seeking acquisition looks a little bit confused. There are a lot of brands, and a small company like Geely is investing in everything. And your suggestion looks a little bit more like consultant would say, come on, you need to rationalize that, you need to break currents. But at the same time, one could wonder if it is precisely because this company is not following a consultant way of looking at the automotive world that has been successful. And that brings me back to this entrepreneurship role that you have emphasized, because in the automotive industry, we have managers. Global managers that manage companies according to very consensual view of what the automotive business should be. And what is fascinating about China is that we have entrepreneurs. I mean, in the automotive industry, when we have seen the last entrepreneurs, I mean, it was Ford or Fiat, Renault, and after that, they were all managers. And it seems like they look at the business in a very different way. And that fast growing, taking opportunities comes first, and efficiency, liquidity, financial management comes second. And I think this is a very important difference in an understanding the trajectory of Geely, that is driven by a vision of growing a business and not by a vision of making the business more efficient or more financially sound. And that makes the company like a strange kind of business from a financial point of view. So that's my second point, these differences between entrepreneurship way of managing a company. It looks more like a startup. Any opportunities to grow should be seized, no matter where it goes, and currents comes later, even if, of course, currency is required to make money, otherwise the business would be losing money. And this brings to my fourth question, which is by finance. And there is a question by Jerry Defontaine, which is also about finance, and is the same, which is, finance has played a crucial role here, because clearly a small company like Geely would have never managed, I think, I don't know, you tell me, to buy Volvo without a huge credit from financial resources. So how are these companies using finance? Because in the automotive sector, we used to say that finance is like a bad thing, because the automotive sector is a small margin, high fixed cost where investment in manufacturing, it blocks liquidity. So from a financial point of view, is a bad business. And so when finance gets into the car industry, most of the time, force short-time decision, it leads to get rid of any business that is not core business and so on. But here it seems that these companies is being capable of using finance for their own purpose and to really make it as a tool. So can you tell us a little bit more about how this company managed to use finance for its own purposes rather than being used or being managed by finance? And I think that just make a small announcement. I've assisted yesterday to a discussion of a PhD about this. It's a discussion about financialization in PESA by Quentin Belot. And it was very interesting PhD with a lot of empirical material. I think we will see a lot of very interesting articles coming out of that. And it was talking about endogenous financialization, which is the fact that you should look at financialization from the company point of view and not just only from institutional finance transforming the way companies work. And I think that could apply very nicely to the case of Geely. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to talk about. That's the main question I would like to raise. And then there are a lot of other questions that are coming up in the chat. And I've seen Martin Schroeder, Bela Gargowski. Yes. So I think Bela Gargowski was the first one to ask the microphone. Then there is Martin Schroeder's and Vittorio Valli. I don't know if the order is right or not, but please go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you. Hello, Bela Gargowski. I think I was not the next one, so if any of you, Vittorio or Martin, prefer.
Well, go ahead. You have the voice, and then we'll shift to.
Okay, good. Thank you. So so Bela Gargowski from the ETI, European Trade Union Institute. A question also on the financialization aspect. I think it is quite stunning that we have different models with different consequences. So just to mention three, Tesla was successful in raising venture capital on a massive scale. This is not what we have in Europe. In Europe, most OEMs are making their own profits, accumulate profits for their investments. There is no venture capital, and also credits are playing a less important role. But what is the consequence? They are expanding the SUV production because this is what brings profit. So it is a rather counterproductive way of accumulating money for good investments. And actually, this is what General Motors is also doing. China, on the other hand, at least my perception, has a lot of government funding for the future investments. So what is your take on that? And how do you see this in the Chinese context? Is it an advantage? Thank you.
Okay, please, Vittorio, Vittorio Valli, can you please ask the
question? Yes. Do you hear me? My question is about financial resources. Tommaso said that perhaps there has been an endogenous accumulation of profit that was used for the expansion. But how was it possible for a company who in the 2010s is about 1 million, a little more vehicles sold, and at very low prices, because they were sold mainly on the Chinese market, to have enough financial resources to invest in Volvo, invest in SDI, invested then in Proton and so on, and also begin a difficult and financial heavy trajectory on electrical vehicles, because there the problem of batteries is very important and it's very costly to devise new kind of batteries that can be competitive with other producers in the world. We know that regional government were very important in the aiding financial research too, but there were also other kind of resources, banks or rise in capital in a stock exchange market or other financial resources to make possible this so rapid expansion.
I would just wanted to say that what I was saying is it was precisely the relationship with the finance, but by endogenous financialization, I meant that rather than looking at financialization as the process by which finance takes control institutionally of companies, changing the way their governments work, we can also see how companies, even in this contemporary process of increasing power of finance, use financial resources for their own purpose. So my argument was current with your question, which is how Geely has managed to obtain all this liquidity to be able to acquire Volvo, to take 9 billion euros of participation in Daimler and so on and so on. So there was no contradiction with your question. Okay, so Martin, please.
Hello, good morning from Japan. I have two questions. The first concerns Proton. So that's maybe, I'm backing on Tommaso's question. So that's maybe like the next quote unquote failed or perceived as failed asset that Geely is investing in and trying to probably turn around. What I'm interested in is if my information is correct, the Malaysian government is still owning the majority of the company and Geely is just a minority owner. So how are they trying to deal with that situation? And the other is more related to China. So my perception of the Chinese government policy is that in the past, they had a very strong preference for pushing nationally owned car makers. So irrespective of nationally means controlled by the national government or by local governments like in Shanghai, that they should be like the national champions that drive the development of the industry forward. And that around maybe 2010, 12, there was a discussion that the private Chinese companies are actually performing better than a lot of the state-owned companies. So has that discussion somehow influenced the Chinese government policy that they are looking to treat private or state-owned Chinese players in a similar way or the identical way today, and no longer as like the private Chinese car makers are like the second best option that you don't really like because you cannot control it directly.
Okay, there were two questions in the chat that we have not been raised. I don't know if Jean-Marie Urtiguer wants to ask the question himself or not. I think he left.
I can ask the question myself, yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, it's very simple questions. Geely announced that they would be ready to share the CMA platform with other companies. It's not very clear it's OEM or companies or whatever. It is kind of new because usually this is the last thing you want to share. Is it serious and how do we interpret this?
There was a last question by Stefan Heim that if he wants to raise him himself about it.
There was a question of Marc Alochet also. So.
Okay. I think the question of Mark was partly answered by Hua WANG in the chat. Yes, Stefan.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very basic question. Yeah, I really would like to know more. Let's put apart all the Chinese local government and all those things. Well, the whole thing is about how Geely evolved. I mean, in terms of knowledge, what can they do now? From now on, do you believe that Geely can compete? They have enough knowledge in their own firm now to grow? And how the deal with Volvo? How was it made? Did they acquire enough knowledge to now become a, let's say, a good competitor on the global stage? Well, that's for me. Thank you.
Okay, there are really a lot of questions. So, I mean, I guess you have written down a little bit. How do you want to answer to them? You don't need to answer to all of them, of course, even if that's also a possibility. So I'll leave the floor to the three speakers and see what you can tell us about all these very interesting issues.
Okay, Giovanni, you would like to pick some questions, to answer?
You can start, if you like.
Okay.
I follow.
I try to pick several questions. The first of all is about the financial field. It's true that you see that in our chapters, we don't have specific chapters talking about financial part. In fact, three of us, none of us are specialists in the financial aspect. Well, so based on that, I try to answer the question in a broader and a general perspective. First of all, in the earliest, I can't remember which year, but in I think that the late 1990s, Geely has already been listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange market. So converted a company from a family business, because before there was even the, his brother or family members were took the shares of the company, and Li Shufu cleaned up and convert a family business towards a listed company to raise the capital. So this is one aspect. So today you still can find the existence of this listed company. Secondly, what we found out is a kind of a project-based financing. The moment when Giovanni talking about a graphic to illustrate, there are lots of plants, or maybe Wenxian, there are lots of manufacturing plants all over China. In fact, behind that is a kind of the public-private cooperation. So the general model is the following: local or regional government, they will provide the kind of the land as a kind of the partners. On top of that, they will mobilize public banks to provide the financing for the loans. And then in such a way, because the main interest of the regional governments is to stimulate the labor and the local economy. So as you know, that automobile industry is a very important pillar for the employment and the regional dynamics. So this is the second approach. In one of the chapters that we talked about is the Geely Daimler case. As mentioned by Tommaso, we have digged deeper, tried to open that black box. Of course, Geely acquired, by the end, Geely acquired 9.69% of Daimler, right? The total announced investment was $9 billion, but in fact, that was not a true, investment by Geely per se, because Geely is using a very complex, structure to make it happen, including, for example, the financial financial tools like what we call the collar operations. Without going into the details, there several banks are involved into that to do that. So those are three approaches to make it happen. Talk to the case of the Proton, joint venture 51-49. In fact, this is also a kind of for me personally, I think that this is a smart move. Chinese entrepreneurs' pragmatic way of doing the things, from a sense that even during the interview, you see that Li Shufu likes use the Chinese way of the metaphors, right? Just like say, I love you, or the moment when acquire Volvo to say that it's a little peasant try to, made a marriage with the princess, right? So in here, the metaphor is to say that we acknowledge that you are big brother and we are, little brother. It's a 51% versus 49%, so as to, grant a confidence to the government, and then progressively they make the technology transfer in terms of hardware, software to upgrade the product. So, and also to answer the question to say that whether Chinese private companies are equally treated as the state-owned enterprises, honestly speaking, I don't believe that is happening now, despite that this is the wish, or it is always the wish expressed by the government, and we still see a domination of Chinese state-owned enterprises versus the private one. So the general business environment or the condition for the private companies are not in a equal or favorable situation. Talk to the CMA platform sharing. This is this is announced by Geely. Well, it is, we don't have yet seen any kind of a clear sign that there are the buyers or the partners to make it happen. Well, interestingly, it is worth to also take a closer look, because 2 days ago, Geely announced to create another strategic partnership with the provider, the service, how to say, the provider of Apple. The name is Foxconn, right? So Geely create a JV with Foxconn to produce, to produce the cars. So the objectives to say car in the future will become a commodity, right? And then in the future is simply put your brand and that's it. So that is a kind of the new strategic move announced 2 days ago. Then in terms of the knowledge management, during our different interviews, we find an interesting phenomenon is a kind of the internal competition mechanism. There will be several R&D centers making on the similar projects, both inside of China and outside of China, or even inside of China, there will be several teams to compete on the same, similar projects. So to echo Tommaso's remarks, to say that in the Western approach, we are looking for the rationalization, optimizations, and here inside of the company, despite after 20 or longer history, we still can feel a culture in Chinese way of expression, that so a culture of the wolf, a thirst to compete, a thirst to acquire. So that is the. I stop here because I've talked too much. Try to make quick comments on different answers on different questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I add some some pieces of answers, me too. In fact, the knowledge management and with internal competition was a very interesting case of cultural distance, of difficulty on the Volvo side to accept this kind of dynamics that were considered as very usual on the Chinese side. So it was a very interesting case of a cross-cultural relation. Coming back to some of the other questions, very interesting questions. So Ford, the story of Ford with Volvo was quite ended with a complete failure, because Ford produced losses under one part of the Ford group for the first time in its history, starting in 1927. So there was not investment. I think there was also paradoxically intercultural management problems between American attitude, American way of management, and the Volvo tradition. Maybe more than in the case of Chinese Scandinavian relation. Because Chinese approach, Geely approach have been much more pragmatic than it was in the case of Volvo. I agree with Tommaso that the huge, massive investment, liquidity were very important, the key for success for acquisition of Volvo, as in the case of Tata. I don't think Tata and Geely are easily comparable, because Tata is a very diversified group with a very old history. Nevertheless, with William Hua in the past, we tried to compare Tata and Geely on a very specific case that was the low-cost production and platform strategy and semi-open or open platform in that case, in modularity in that case. I think Tommaso said a very interesting thing, that probably they were so successful just because they did not follow the consultants. But I think in this case, the animal spirits of the entrepreneur played, in fact, an important role. I think it's not only the case of liquidity, massive investment, but also pragmatism, long-term strategy, and flexibility. So capability to adapt. And with respect to the Ford era, in the case of Geely, there was huge investment and long-term perspectives, not just short-term profits. By the way, the problem of losses of Volvo under the Ford rule, it's not so easy to understand if they were really due to bad performances or also to a mechanism of transfer pricing. Because it's also possible that the transfer pricing adopted during the years of Ford Group had this kind of negative impact on the financial results. We should deepen that point. And final, yes, also because of Vittorio, beside the local government, provinces and municipality, also very important state-owned, central state-owned bank supported the acquisition and the subsequent investment. It's very interesting to take into account this shift in the view. I think in the case of China, state-owned enterprises, in this case, a local state, the provinces owned, play a very central role. But the case of Geely shows that a dynamic private company with good relation with local government may have a quite good results. So I don't know how much we can compare Geely with BYD, because BYD is quite a different story, because they started as a producer of batteries, and they went straight to the electric vehicle with diversification from the batteries downstream. But absolutely, I think Geely can be competitive with BYD. Well, that's more or less I'm. Excuse me if it's not easy to answer to all of the questions, because it was so rich. But these are just few points. Thank you.
Okay, I can add a few observations from my own experience to the question, Ford versus Geely. I think according to the people on the ground in Gothenburg, they feel that Ford basically, they treat Volvo as a production center. There's no investment on technology, nothing really. But Geely's approach is very different. According to Li Shufu, he described Volvo as a tiger, should not be kept in a cage, should be released in the mountain, let it roll freely. So Geely, Li Shufu basically let folks in Gothenburg run their company themselves. So within 2-3 years, the company fully turned around. And of course, with China as Geely's, as Volvo's second home market, so that really helped in this case a great deal. Regarding the finance, I think William made a good point that Geely is a public trade company, get a good percentage of its finance come from the stock market. But also, remember Li Shufu, he's pretty well connected. He does not have a political ambition, but he's sort of a Chinese congressman. He's a state representative of the state assembly. So he basically rub elbows with all those power to be. He know all the people. He can make deals happen. And you know, China, a lot of things is based on personal relationships. So that is definitely, I give credit to him for that. And he actually being described as Chinese Ford. So that's his nicknames. I think one article from Forbes described him as Chinese Ford. Also, we had to bear in mind that Geely benefit from the giant economic wave, the economic reform. So when China opened up in the 80s and 90s, especially after China into WTO, it basically goes through all the industrial revolution that a Western country experienced in a century. China goes through in 20-30 years at a cost of environment, low cost labor. So if you can make cars, every family wants to own a car. So if you can sell cars, you're going to get rich. That's the reality that at least the first 2 decades of Chinese automobile industry. As to the state-owned enterprise versus the private enterprise, definitely the bank will give preferred treatment to state-owned enterprise. And this is a new trend under the current leadership of Xi Jinping. He would like to have a more SOE play a more important role. But I feel that Geely is a sort of an exception. So he has his connection. Actually, it was rumored his wife was a sister of President Xi Jinping's wife, but that turned out is not true. But that's the things going on in China. As to the questions of Proton, back in early 2004, I think 2005, Geely already entered agreement to build a factory in Malaysia, but that never materialized because eventually the Malaysia government said, you can have a factory here, but whatever you manufacture had to be export. You cannot sell local. So that failed. So when they bought a Proton, it's basically to gain the market. But unlike the Volvo deal, even though Geely retained 49% of ownership, I think important distinction is that Geely retained a management right. So all the people in charge are the team from Geely, from China. So is a huge difference. And after the Geely's investment, Proton really been turned around as well, because Geely invests in technology, invests in new models, had the first SUV sold in Southeast Asian market. So that's the huge success, helped the Proton gain back market share. As to the future of the Geely, it's definitely now the company, according to our investment, our conversation with top management, they don't see them as a technology, as an automobile company anymore. They see them as a technology company. So they invest heavily. They're betting their future on the mobility, on the electronic vehicles. So that's very interesting to see in the next few years. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of ground has been covered, but perhaps there are still some questions that need to be asked, or some people who haven't spoken yet. I see Sebastian wants to speak, and so I'll give the floor to him. And if anybody else, just you can open your microphone and start speaking after Sebastian.
Yes, thank you. I have a more of a methodological question. It's very simple. How did you manage to access to the firm, to access to the data, and to manage to enter this black box that is automobile constructor? I know that in France, it's, even if we work at the Gerpisa, it's not always evident to have access to high-ranking officials within the firm, to have access to internal information. So I wanted to know more about the way you managed to do it. Voilà. That is all.
Holger.
Yes, good morning to everybody. Hi, I just have a simple question, and I'm interested in bronze, and I just want to ask, what does Geely do with Lotus? Well, Lotus is a very, very special brand indeed, and has many fans here, for instance, in Japan. So what is the intention, what they are going to do with Lotus? That's a very small question. Thank you very much.
Any other question? I see that there was a comment by Hua WANG, who I know she's doing a research about Chinese car makers. Has been doing research on Chinese car maker for a long period of time. So if she wants to add some comments or point of view, she's welcome, of course.
Thank you. So, yeah, I only asked about the difference between Geely and BYD. I think they are quite different in their strategies, because BYD is not only a car producer, but is also positioning very strongly in the battery and energy sector. So they are quite different. I don't have other questions because many questions have been raised. Thank you very much.
Okay. One thing that have not been really discussed, and I've just mentioned a little bit at the beginning, was the impact of the COVID crisis. And we had a roundtable about China at the virtual international colloquium in June. We see that China is recovering with the famous V curve, so it's going back more or less to business as usual, while things are still complicated in the United States and Europe. What's your view about Geely, about more generally the Chinese automotive industry? Is the post-COVID situation just business as usual? What have been the major changes in terms of policies and regulation? Perhaps you might also, if you want, to talk a little bit about the fact that we've seen a slowing down of sales of new energy vehicles, and due in particular to the fact that state aids and state supports were start to being taken away, and then we've seen reaction from the government to put back some of these things. So how things are evolving, what is the position of Geely? If you can spend some words about this post-COVID scenario and current evolution in China, I think that would be of interest for all the Gerpisa researchers, but you don't have to, but if you want to spend some words about that could be interesting. Okay, there are no other questions, so please, last round of answers.
Giovanni?
I think you are in the best position, given the question, you are in the best position to answer, because I have no special element on the first two, especially.
Okay, you see that the study on the Geely dated back to my period of the PhD study. So in fact, I started to take a look about the Geely from 1998 to 1999. And during my PhD study, via my personal relationship, in fact, more precisely was my student at the, Catch Business School, now that is called, right? It's Euromed before, or École Supérieure de Marseille Provence, EMCP. So in fact, started from that one, you progressively accumulate your personal network via kind of small snowball effect, right? You know this person, then you ask this person to introduce another one. So my first B-level journal publication on the Asia Pacific Journal of Management was based on the field study. By visiting the companies, assembling plants, talk to the purchasing guys, plant managers, technicians, etc., etc. So it's accumulation of the asset, and then you win the trust of top people, right? So recently, for example, several months ago, I was invited by the CEO of the company to, together with some other scholars, go to Beijing, before the Beijing Auto Show, to have a closed-door discussion with them. So, when you build the trust, when you illustrate, there was the previous publications. Sure, Giovanni, you have also visited years ago, right? So it's a progressive approach to make the things happen. So after that, they opened the door for us. In fact, it's also from their perspective, we are not the only team to make it. There are Chinese scholars from famous university like Beijing University or Zhejiang University. Scholars are also conducting the research, and our strength is the English language based intellectual output. So that is why they also look for the diversification of the resources of intellectual input. So this is the question. And for the COVID, I leave the question on Lotus to Wenxian, because you were in charge of that chapter. For the COVID impact, it's still in a stage of the recovery, as what we have discussed the last time, right? So there's a mixed picture about the different segments, and you see that for the luxury segment, it's still experiencing the growth. For the electric vehicles, especially like Tesla car, It's becoming a hit in the China market, produced in Shanghai, and Shanghai per se, it's I think that it's not far away from 30,000 units per month. So, but at the aggregated level, it's not yet reached to the same level as the year before the COVID. So we are still in a recovery stage. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Definitely want to echo what William said, that personal relationship and the connection is very important. So you guys must treat William well. He's well connected in China. He makes this whole project happen. So as to the Lotus question, so Lotus was struggling before Geelys acquisition. There's no models for quite a few years. So after Geelys acquisition, really Geelys after a technology, after its sector, because Geelys had been concentrated on lower to middle tier market, but this sports luxury car market is a new territory for Geelys. So it's asking for the technology and want to break into the new market. But its strategy is also very interesting because it's try to convert it into a new EV market. So the newest market is a very, very powerful electronic vehicle with hundreds of horsepower. Also, the price is much higher. I think it used to be, old model is about $100,000. Now it's $250,000. So they have limited edition. And also, Geelys set a factory in Wuhan, there where the COVID-19 first breakout. So they're supposed to release the new model last year. So I'm interested to see how it goes. So that's the story of Lotus. COVID-19, after the virus first breakout, Geelys is very prompt to give donations to the frontline healthcare workers, to the vaccine development. So it's very political savvy of Li Shufu. I don't know how the sales going on during the COVID-19 last year, but I heard the Chinese market in general is doing pretty decent compared with the rest of the world market. Also, Geelys is a sales marketing promotion is emphasize its high quality air filter that's going to filter out the virus. So that's the new selling point. So that's just very interesting from my personal observation. So we'll see. Thank you.
I just would like to add a few words in answer to Sebastian. How did we manage the access to information? Well, you know, I think that, of course, it's the basic point is to build a good trust and the respect for different roles, the independence of the external researcher. I think that sometimes I had experiences, the case of Fiat FCA expansion as a multinational company, and sometimes there is a gap between the center and the periphery. For example, in our research, we had a very good information discussion both in the headquarters in China and within CVT, this joint new R&D center. While it was more difficult to get information from inside Ford, for inside Volvo itself, you know, Volvo people were not so easy to access as GD people or CVT. So sometimes in my experience, for example, I had a good relation with Fiat headquarters in Turin, in Italy. while difficulties in Brazil, because local managers didn't like to cooperate so much with external researchers, even if from the headquarters there was a clear message to help us. And on the contrary may happen too. My last interviews, very interesting, within Fiat Group was in Serbia, and local director manager were extremely open in giving all information, all needed visit, while Turin people in the headquarters didn't wanted to control the possible results of the research. So in that case, the attitude was much more cooperative at the periphery than at the center. So I think it's always very interesting, multi-level kind of a relation you have to build, and it's very important this mutual recognition and building this kind of trust.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we think this is a very interesting topic that we not often discuss. So thank you, Sebastian, for this question, because it's true that you all work with these big multinational companies, and we all have experience of different type of fieldwork, sources, materials, and sharing some strategies how we do find interesting things, what you get out from factory visits, which is not always evident. I think personally I've learned a lot to do factory visit in the Gerpisa conference, because you start going around with people that know very well what is happening, and they have the right questions, and then you open up some kind of discussion with the people that do the factory visits that can be extremely enriching. And so I think that it is an interesting topic that opens up very interesting avenues, and perhaps we should introduce some kind of exchange about our fieldwork strategies and experience at the Gerpisa level. But that will be for another time. The time being, I would just ask to thank our speakers. We are all looking forward for the publication of the book. So as soon as that will happen, we will make, of course, some announcement on the Gerpisa site. And perhaps we will make available some chapter for the Gerpisa users. Let's see if that's possible. You can read the foreword I've written, because we had agreed that the editor was okay with that. It's just only for the access for the Gerpisa user, so you need to connect to the site in order to access that, but it provides a rapid overview of all the things that you would find in the book. So I'm looking forward for the publication, and so I thank everybody. Just an announcement: next week on Friday, same time, same place, virtual, we will receive another groups of international scholars. They're all Italian. They will present another book which has been already published last year about Fiat. It's called Lavorare in Fabbrica Oggi, which is work in the shop floor today, and is an inquiry on working condition at FSA. So we will have 3 speakers, Daniele Di Nunzio, Matteo Gaddi, and Angelo Moro. The topic will be slightly different, because we will really be looking into working condition, employment conditions, and work organization. But it's another very good book. So I'm looking forward to see most of you again that day, and so you're all welcome to come in 1 week time. Bye. Thank you, everybody. Good night for those who are in Japan or in China.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tommaso.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.